The manila envelope hit Grandma Eleanor's mahogany dining table with a sharp slap that silenced every conversation in the room. My sister Jessica stood there, triumphant smirk spreading across her face like she'd just won the lottery. Around the table, my family leaned forward with hungry anticipation, ready to feast on my supposed downfall. My heart hammered against my ribs as the reality crashed over me. She'd actually done it. She'd hired private investigators to spy on me for 3 whole years. That envelope contained surveillance reports, photographs, financial records. Jessica believed she was about to expose me as the fraud she'd convinced everyone I was. 3 years ago, I thought leaving my family would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. I was wrong. The hardest thing was discovering why I had to leave in the first place. Back then, I was 25, working as a junior accountant at Henderson Financial Services in downtown Cleveland. Living at home seemed practical: save money, help with Grandma Eleanor, be close to family. I believed in family loyalty, in sticking together through thick and thin. That belief nearly destroyed me. It started with small things that didn't add up, bills that seemed higher than they should be, Grandma mentioning expenses she didn't remember authorizing, medical bills for treatments that never happened. I noticed because numbers are my language, they tell stories that words often hide. Eleanor had always been sharp as a tack, managing her finances with the precision of someone who'd survived the Great Depression. She balanced her checkbook to the penny, kept meticulous records, never missed a payment. So when I saw the discrepancies, my stomach twisted with dread. I spent weeks double-checking everything before I found the smoking gun. Forged signatures on checks worth thousands of dollars, withdrawals from Eleanor's account that she never made, medical expense reimbursements for treatments that existed only on fraudulent paperwork. My mother Patricia and Jessica had been systematically stealing from their own mother and grandmother. The confrontation happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in November. I'd gathered all my evidence: photocopies of forged checks, bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, fake medical bills. My hands shook as I spread everything across the kitchen table. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely steady. Patricia's face went white when she saw the documents. Jessica's reaction was completely different: pure, calculated rage. "You've been spying on us?" Jessica hissed, her eyes darting between the papers and my face. "Going through private documents? What kind of person does that?" "The kind who cares about our grandmother," I shot back. "Look at these signatures, Mom. These aren't Eleanor's. Someone forged her name on checks totaling over $15,000. Patricia's voice cracked as she tried to explain. "Money's been tight since your father died. The house needs repairs. Medical bills keep coming. Eleanor doesn't understand how expensive things are now." "So you steal from her?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "She trusts you completely, and you're robbing her blind?" Jessica stepped between us, her face twisted with fury. "Nobody's stealing anything. Eleanor asked us to help manage her finances because she's getting confused. Sometimes we have to make decisions for her own good." "By forging her signature? By billing her insurance for medical treatments she never received?" "You don't know what you're talking about," Jessica snapped. "You live here rent-free, contribute nothing to household expenses, and now you're making wild accusations against the people who actually take care of Eleanor." The gaslighting was immediate and brutal. According to them, I was paranoid, ungrateful, mentally unstable. They turned my concerns into character flaws, my evidence into delusions. "Cheryl's always been dramatic," Patricia told Eleanor later that evening. "She's been acting strange lately, making up stories, going through private papers. I'm worried about her mental health." When I tried to show Eleanor the evidence, they'd already poisoned the well. Eleanor loved her daughter and granddaughter unconditionally. She couldn't believe they'd steal from her. My accusations seemed like the ravings of a troubled young woman who couldn't handle adult responsibilities. The family meeting they called was a masterpiece of manipulation. Jessica painted me as having a breakdown, unable to cope with my father's death, lashing out at the people trying to help. Patricia cried as she expressed concern for my well-being. Cousin David and his wife Sarah sat uncomfortably, clearly wanting to stay out of family drama. "Maybe Cheryl needs professional help," Jessica suggested with false concern. "These paranoid thoughts, the accusations against family, it's not normal behavior." I sat there, watching my family turn against me based on lies. The evidence I'd gathered was dismissed as misunderstanding at best, fabrication at worst. My character was assassinated with surgical precision. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I faced an impossible choice. Stay and fight a battle I couldn't win, watching Eleanor suffer while my family painted me as crazy, or leave and try to build a case from the outside, knowing they'd spin my departure as proof of my instability. I chose to leave. The morning I packed my car, Jessica stood in the driveway watching with satisfaction. "Running away when things get tough," she called out. "That's so typical of you, Cheryl. Eleanor deserves better than a granddaughter who abandons her family for selfish dreams." Those words burned into my memory as I drove away. Jessica had won the first round completely. She'd eliminated the only person who knew about their crimes and painted herself as the devoted daughter protecting her mother from a disturbed family member. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how far I'd go to protect Eleanor. For 3 years, she'd been telling everyone I'd failed to make it on my own, that I was probably living in poverty somewhere, too proud to come home and admit I needed family. She'd crafted a narrative where my absence proved her point about my character. Now, sitting at Eleanor's 80th birthday dinner, Jessica was about to play her trump card. The private investigator's report would supposedly prove I'd been lying about rebuilding my life, that I was the failure she'd always claimed I was. Her confidence was about to become her downfall. 6 months ago, Eleanor made a comment that sent panic shooting through Jessica's carefully constructed world. During their weekly grocery shopping trip, Eleanor mentioned how much she missed me and wondered if maybe it was time to reach out. "I've been thinking about Cheryl a lot lately," Eleanor said as Jessica pushed the shopping cart through the produce section. 3 years is a long time to hold on to anger. "Maybe I should try to find her, see how she's doing." Jessica's blood turned to ice water. In the 3 years since my departure, she'd become Eleanor's primary caregiver and financial helper. What started as opportunistic theft had evolved into systematic exploitation on a scale that would shock even seasoned fraud investigators. The beauty of her operation was its legitimacy on the surface. Jessica had positioned herself as the devoted daughter caring for her aging mother. She handled Eleanor's appointments, managed her medications, organized her finances. To outside observers, she was a model of family dedication. The reality was far more sinister. Jessica had perfected the art of financial elder abuse. She'd started small, reimbursing herself for legitimate expenses, then gradually inflating the amounts. A $20 prescription became $40. A $50 grocery bill became $90. Eleanor trusted her completely and never questioned the receipts. From there, it escalated rapidly. Jessica created fake medical bills for treatments Eleanor never received, submitting them to Medicare and supplemental insurance for reimbursement. She'd learned to forge Eleanor's signature so perfectly that even bank tellers never questioned the checks. The most audacious part of her scheme involved home repairs and improvements. Jessica would get estimates for work that supposedly needed to be done on Eleanor's house, then collect payment without ever having the work completed. Eleanor's basement flooded required $5,000 in repairs that never happened. The roof replacement cost $8,000 for materials that were never purchased. But Jessica's greed had grown beyond simple theft. 3 months ago, she'd crossed a line that transformed her from a greedy family member into a dangerous criminal. Using Eleanor's identity and forged documents, Jessica had taken out a second mortgage on Eleanor's house. The $75,000 she'd stolen was gone, spent on paying off her own credit card debt, covering losses from her secret gambling addiction, and maintaining a lifestyle far beyond her means as a part-time medical office assistant. Eleanor's house, the home she'd lived in for 47 years, where she'd raised her children and planned to spend her final years, was now collateral for Jessica's crimes. If Eleanor discovered the mortgage, if anyone investigated the finances, if I ever returned with evidence of the theft, Jessica would lose everything. When Eleanor mentioned wanting to reconnect with me, Jessica knew she was facing an existential threat. I was the one person who'd already suspected the truth. If I returned and resumed my investigation, if I'd spent 3 years building a case, if I'd learned enough to expose everything Jessica's life as she knew it would be over. That's when she decided to hire a private investigator. Jessica researched extensively before choosing Martin Kane, a former police detective who'd built a reputation for thorough, discreet investigations. She specifically wanted someone who specialized in finding dirt on people, someone who could uncover embarrassing or incriminating information. The meeting took place at a coffee shop in downtown Cleveland, far from her neighborhood where someone might recognize her. Jessica wore sunglasses and paid cash, playing the role of a concerned family member seeking truth about a problematic relative. My sister cut off contact with our family 3 years ago, Jessica explained to Martin, her voice carefully modulated to convey hurt and concern. She claimed she was successful, building a new life, but we have reasons to believe she's lying. Martin took notes as Jessica spun her web of fiction. According to her version, I'd always been unstable, prone to grandiose fantasies and delusional thinking. My departure from the family was painted as running away from responsibilities, abandoning an elderly grandmother who needed support. She sends occasional messages claiming she's doing well, but something doesn't add up, Jessica continued. We're worried she might be involved in drugs, or in an abusive relationship, or just too proud to admit she's failed. Our grandmother is elderly and still hopes Cheryl will come home. We need to know the truth. Jessica's instructions were explicit and detailed. She wanted evidence of drug use, financial problems, relationship failures, legal troubles, anything that would prove I was lying about my success and living in circumstances that would embarrass me if revealed publicly. She specifically requested photographic evidence, financial records if possible, and documentation of my living conditions. Jessica wanted ammunition for a public confrontation that would permanently discredit me and eliminate any threat I might pose to her operation. I'm planning a birthday dinner for our grandmother, Jessica told Martin. If Cheryl shows up claiming she's successful and we're the bad guys, I want to be able to prove she's lying. Sometimes you have to use truth to protect family from harmful delusions. Martin quoted a fee of $5,000 for a comprehensive investigation, money Jessica paid from Eleanor's account using a forged check. She considered it an investment in protecting her criminal enterprise. What Jessica didn't know was that Martin Kane had spent 15 years as a police detective specializing in financial crimes. His radar for dishonesty was highly calibrated, and something about Jessica's story didn't ring true. Legitimate family members worried about a relative usually wanted help reconnecting, not ammunition for public humiliation. But Martin took the job, planning to conduct a thorough investigation that would reveal the truth, whatever that truth turned out to be. Meanwhile, Jessica worked to solidify her position with the rest of the family. She coached Patricia on what to say if I contacted anyone directly. She reminded cousin David and his wife Sarah that their small business had received several loans from Eleanor over the years. Loans that could be called in if Eleanor's financial situation became complicated. We all need to present a united front, Jessica told them during a family dinner. Cheryl abandoned Eleanor when she needed family support most. If she comes back now with some story about being successful, we can't let her manipulate an elderly woman who's already been through enough heartbreak. David and Sarah were uncomfortable with the family dynamics, but they had 3 young children and a struggling restaurant that depended on Eleanor's financial support. They couldn't afford to take sides against Jessica, especially when she controlled access to Eleanor and managed her finances. The web Jessica had woven was complex and effective. She'd positioned herself as Eleanor's protector while systematically robbing her. She'd painted me as the villain while committing crimes that would land her in federal prison. She'd enlisted family support through financial dependency while planning to destroy the one person who could expose her. But every web has weak points, and Jessica's confidence was about to become her greatest weakness. She was so convinced of her own cleverness, so certain that I'd failed in my new life, that she never considered what might happen if the private investigator's report revealed something completely different from what she expected. She was about to learn that underestimating someone can be a fatal mistake. Martin Kane had investigated over 300 cases during his 15 years as a police detective, but this one felt different from the moment he began surveillance. He'd been hired to find dirt on someone his client claimed was lying about success, but what he discovered challenged everything Jessica had told him. Martin's first stop was the address he'd traced through public records, a luxury high-rise apartment building in downtown Cincinnati's business district. The building screamed success: marble lobby, concierge service, valet parking, spectacular city views from floor-to-ceiling windows. This wasn't the residence of someone living in poverty or struggling with addiction. The monthly rent on units in that building started at $3,000, and that was for the smaller apartments on lower floors. Martin positioned himself across the street on a Tuesday morning, camera ready, expecting to catch me leaving for a minimum wage job or meeting with questionable associates. Instead, he watched me emerge from the parking garage driving a pristine silver BMW sedan, dressed in what his experienced eye recognized as expensive professional attire. Following me through Cincinnati traffic, Martin felt his first stirring of doubt about Jessica's version of events. I drove directly to Morrison and Associates, a prestigious financial consulting firm housed in a gleaming glass tower in the heart of the business district. Morrison and Associates was no small-time operation. Martin recognized the name from newspaper articles about major corporate acquisitions and financial restructuring deals. This was a firm that handled multi-million-dollar accounts for Fortune 500 companies. Martin's investigative instincts, honed by years of police work, kicked into high gear. He spent the next 3 days conducting discreet interviews with people in my apartment building, my workplace, and my neighborhood. What he discovered painted a picture that contradicted every element of Jessica's story. Cheryl Matthews is one of our most dedicated residents, the building's concierge told Martin, believing he was conducting a routine background check for a potential business partnership. Always polite, pays her rent early, never any complaints or problems. She volunteers at the community center on weekends, tutoring kids in math and financial literacy. At Morrison and Associates, Martin spoke with the building's security guard during a shift change. "Miss Matthews? She's here early, stays late, always professional, senior analyst, I think. Heard she got another promotion last month. The partners really respect her work." The picture emerging was of someone who'd not only survived leaving her family but had thrived spectacularly. Martin's police background had taught him to recognize genuine success versus fake facades, and everything about my life screamed authentic achievement. But Martin's investigation was just beginning, and what he discovered next changed everything. Following me one evening after work, Martin expected to see typical after-hours activities, grocery shopping, dinner with friends, maybe a workout at the gym. Instead, I drove to the University of Cincinnati's law school campus and parked near the continuing education building. Through careful observation, Martin discovered I was attending evening law classes, working toward a specialized certification in elder fraud detection and financial crime investigation. The irony wasn't lost on him. Jessica had hired him to investigate someone who was secretly training to investigate people like Jessica. Martin's police contacts helped him access more information. My academic record showed straight A grades in courses like elder abuse investigation, financial crime detection, and legal advocacy for vulnerable populations. I wasn't just succeeding, I was preparing for something bigger. That's when Martin made the decision that would change everything. Instead of looking for dirt on me, he began investigating my family. Using his contacts in law enforcement and financial institutions, Martin ran background checks on Jessica and Patricia. What he found made his blood run cold. Jessica's financial records revealed a pattern of escalating debt and suspicious activity. She'd maxed out multiple credit cards, taken cash advances she couldn't afford, and had documented problems with gambling. Her bank records showed deposits that didn't match her reported income from part-time work. More troubling were the transactions involving Eleanor's accounts. Martin's trained eye recognized classic patterns of financial elder abuse, frequent small withdrawals that might escape notice, reimbursements for expenses that seemed inflated, and financial activity that didn't match an elderly person's typical spending patterns. Martin had seen enough cases of elder abuse to know the warning signs, and Eleanor's financial records were a textbook example of systematic exploitation. But the most shocking discovery came when Martin dug deeper into Eleanor's recent financial activity. Using public records and his investigative contacts, he uncovered something that made him realize this case had moved far beyond simple theft. Jessica had forged Eleanor's signature on mortgage documents, essentially stealing her house while she still lived in it. The $75,000 mortgage had been used to cover Jessica's debts and finance her lifestyle, while Eleanor remained completely unaware that her home was now collateral for her granddaughter's crimes. Martin sat in his office that evening, staring at the evidence he'd assembled. Jessica had hired him to prove her sister was lying about success, when the truth was that Jessica herself was committing federal crimes against her own grandmother. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Through his law enforcement contacts, Martin learned that I was already on the radar of the FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force, not as a suspect, but as a potential informant. 8 months earlier, I'd contacted the task force with preliminary information about suspected elder abuse involving my grandmother. I'd been working with agents to build a comprehensive case, using my financial expertise and legal training to document the crimes systematically. Martin realized with growing amazement that Jessica had hired him to investigate someone who was already investigating her. The private detective hired to find dirt on the whistleblower had instead uncovered evidence of the crimes being reported. That night, Martin faced an ethical decision that would define his career. His client wanted him to find ammunition to discredit and humiliate her sister. But his investigation had revealed that his client was a criminal, and her sister was trying to protect their elderly grandmother from systematic abuse. Martin chose to do what his police training had taught him: follow the evidence wherever it led, even when it meant betraying a paying client's expectations. He spent the next 2 weeks documenting everything he'd discovered: Jessica's financial crimes, the forged mortgage, the systematic theft from Eleanor, the elaborate web of deception that had allowed the abuse to continue for 3 years. When Martin finished his investigation, he had enough evidence to support federal charges for wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and mortgage fraud. He also had a complete picture of my actual life: successful, principled, and dedicated to seeking justice for Eleanor. The report Martin prepared wasn't what Jessica had paid for, but it was exactly what the situation demanded: a thorough, professional documentation of criminal activity that would soon shock a family gathering and change everything for everyone involved. Jessica was about to get exactly what she'd paid for the truth. She just hadn't expected the truth to be about her own crimes rather than her sister's supposed failures. Eleanor's 80th birthday dinner was scheduled for 6:30 on a Saturday evening in October. Jessica had insisted on hosting at the family home, claiming it would be more meaningful for Eleanor to celebrate in the house where she'd raised her children. The real reason was strategic. Jessica wanted complete control over the environment where she planned to destroy my reputation. I drove from Cincinnati to Cleveland that afternoon, my stomach churning with a mixture of anticipation and dread. 3 years away from family felt like 3 decades. The house looked exactly the same from the outside: white colonial, with black shutters, maple tree in the front yard that my father had planted when I was 10 years old. Eleanor opened the front door before I could knock, her face lighting up with the kind of joy that made my heart ache for all the time we'd lost. She looked frailer than I remembered, but her eyes were as sharp and alert as ever. "Cheryl, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and lavender. "I've missed you so much." "I've missed you too, Grandma," I managed, fighting back tears. 3 years of separation, 3 years of wondering if I'd done the right thing, 3 years of building toward this moment. The family gathering in the living room felt like walking into a tableau of polite hostility. Patricia sat stiffly on the couch, her greeting carefully neutral. David and Sarah offered awkward smiles, clearly uncomfortable with family tensions they didn't fully understand. Jessica watched from the kitchen doorway with barely concealed satisfaction. "Look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," Patricia said, her voice sweet enough to hide the barb underneath. "We weren't sure you'd actually show up." "Of course I'd be here for Eleanor's birthday," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Family is important." Jessica stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's interesting that you say that, considering you disappeared for 3 years without explanation. Some of us have been here taking care of Eleanor while you were off chasing whatever fantasy you convinced yourself was more important than family." The trap was being set methodically. Jessica had choreographed this evening down to the last detail, positioning herself as the devoted family member and me as the selfish outsider who'd abandoned responsibility. Eleanor squeezed my hand gently, a gesture so subtle I almost missed it. For just a moment, her eyes met mine with an intensity that seemed to communicate something important. Then the moment passed, and she was smiling warmly at the assembled family. "Let's not rehash old grievances tonight," Eleanor said diplomatically. "This is supposed to be a celebration. Cheryl's here now, and that's what matters." Dinner conversation was a carefully orchestrated performance. Jessica dominated the dialogue, sharing stories about Eleanor's medical appointments, home maintenance projects, family gatherings I'd missed. Each anecdote was designed to highlight her own dedication while emphasizing my absence. "Remember when Eleanor had that bad fall last winter?" Jessica said, passing the mashed potatoes. "I was there within 10 minutes, took her to the emergency room, stayed with her for 8 hours until the doctors confirmed nothing was broken. Family is about being there when people need you, not just when it's convenient." Patricia nodded approvingly. "Jessica has been such a blessing. I don't know what we would have done without her." David and Sarah remained mostly quiet, occasionally contributing safe comments about Eleanor's health or the weather. Their discomfort was palpable, but they seemed afraid to say anything that might upset the delicate family dynamics. I answered questions about my life carefully, sharing enough information to be polite, without revealing details that could be used against me later. Yes, I was working in financial services. Yes, I'd found an apartment I liked. Yes, I was doing well. Jessica's eyes glittered with anticipation each time I spoke. She was waiting for me to claim success, to paint a picture of my new life that she believed her private investigator had already proven false. As dinner wound down and Eleanor began opening birthday presents, Jessica excused herself to the kitchen. She returned carrying a manila envelope with the kind of dramatic flair reserved for courthouse revelations. "Before we have cake, there's something important we need to discuss as a family," Jessica announced, placing the envelope prominently on the dining room table. "I've been worried about some things, and I think it's time for complete honesty." Eleanor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. For just a moment, I caught something in her eyes that looked like anticipation rather than confusion. "What kind of things?" Eleanor asked, her voice carefully neutral. Jessica opened the envelope with theatrical precision, removing a thick stack of documents and photographs. 3 months ago, I hired a private investigator to look into Cheryl's life. I was concerned about some of the stories she's been telling, and I thought our family deserved to know the truth. The room fell silent. David and Sarah exchanged uncomfortable glances. Patricia leaned forward with obvious interest. I felt my heart racing, but something about Eleanor's demeanor kept me from panicking completely. "You hired someone to spy on me?" I asked, genuinely shocked by the audacity. "I hired someone to verify your claims about being successful and independent," Jessica corrected. "Given your history of making accusations and then running away when confronted, I thought we needed objective information about whether you're actually doing as well as you claim." Jessica spread several photographs across the table, pictures of my apartment building, my car, me entering and leaving work. To someone who didn't know better, they might have looked like evidence of surveillance rather than success. "I think we're about to learn some very interesting things about Cheryl's real situation," Jessica continued, reaching for the investigator's written report. "Sometimes the truth isn't what people want to hear, but family deserves honesty." That's when Eleanor dropped her own bombshell. "Actually, Jessica, before you read that report, there's something I need to tell everyone." Eleanor's voice carried a strength and authority that commanded immediate attention. "I hired a private investigator too, about 6 months ago." The color drained from Jessica's face so quickly I thought she might faint. "What?" Jessica whispered. Eleanor reached into her purse and removed her own manila envelope, placing it next to Jessica's on the table. "I've been aware of some irregularities in my finances for quite some time. I wanted professional confirmation before taking any action." Patricia's voice cracked as she spoke. "Mother, what are you talking about?" Eleanor's gaze moved slowly around the table, settling finally on Jessica's terrified face. "I'm talking about systematic theft, forged signatures, fraudulent insurance claims, and mortgage fraud. I'm talking about my own daughter and granddaughter stealing from me while pretending to provide care and support." The room erupted in shocked silence. Jessica's carefully planned confrontation was collapsing into something far more serious than she'd ever imagined. Eleanor continued with devastating calm. "What's more, I've been in contact with Cheryl for 8 months. We've been working together to document the theft and build a comprehensive case against the people who've been abusing my trust." Jessica's private investigator report slipped from her trembling hands, scattering across the table like leaves in a windstorm. Her trap had become her own snare, and she was about to discover that the evening she'd planned as my humiliation would instead mark the beginning of her own downfall. The birthday dinner had become something none of us had expected the moment when 3 years of careful planning finally paid off, and justice began to emerge from the shadows where it had been quietly growing. Martin Kane's report was 47 pages of methodically documented evidence that painted a picture of criminal behavior so systematic it belonged in a law enforcement textbook. As Eleanor spread the pages across the dining room table, the scope of Jessica's crimes became undeniably clear. Page 1 details forged signatures on checks, totaling $38,417 over 36 months. Eleanor read in a voice that remained steady despite the magnitude of betrayal she was revealing. "The handwriting analysis confirms that someone other than me signed these checks, and the bank's security footage shows Jessica making the deposits." Jessica's face had gone ashen, but she managed to stammer out a defense. "Those were reimbursements for legitimate expenses. Eleanor asked me to handle her finances because she was getting confused about money management." Eleanor flipped to page 5 without missing a beat. This page documents fraudulent medical bills submitted to Medicare and my supplemental insurance. Claims for physical therapy sessions I never attended. Medical equipment I never received. Treatments for conditions I don't have. The total fraudulent claims amount to $18,632. Patricia's voice came out as barely a whisper. Jessica, tell me this isn't true. But Eleanor wasn't finished. Page after page revealed a criminal enterprise that had grown bolder and more sophisticated over time. Home repair expenses for work never completed. Forged power of attorney documents. Unauthorized access to bank accounts and investment portfolios. The most devastating revelation came on page 34. Mortgage fraud, Eleanor said, her voice finally showing a tremor of emotion. On March 15th of this year, someone used forged documents and my stolen identity to take out a second mortgage on my house. $75,000 was borrowed against my home without my knowledge or consent. David finally found his voice. $75,000? Jessica, how could you possibly justify that? Jessica's composure cracked completely. I was going to pay it back. The business investments didn't work out like they were supposed to, but I had plans to restore everything. It was temporary. Temporary theft is still theft, Eleanor replied firmly. And taking a mortgage against someone else's home without their knowledge is a federal crime. Sarah spoke up for the first time all evening, her voice shaking. Jessica, you put Eleanor's house at risk? The house she's lived in for almost 50 years? Martin Kane's report included financial projections that made the situation even more chilling. Jessica had been consulting with lawyers about having Eleanor declared mentally incompetent, exploring guardianship and conservatorship options that would have given her complete legal control over Eleanor's assets. Page 41 documents communications between Jessica and attorney Richard Blackstone, a lawyer who specializes in what he calls elder care transitions. Eleanor read. The emails discuss strategies for having me declared unable to manage my own affairs, with Jessica appointed as my legal guardian. The emails, printed in black and white, revealed Jessica's long-term plan with stark clarity. She'd intended to have Eleanor institutionalized in a memory care facility, sell the house to pay off the fraudulent mortgage, and liquidate all remaining assets under the guise of paying for care. The projected timeline shows that Eleanor would have been declared incompetent and institutionalized within 6 months. Eleanor continued reading. All assets would have been liquidated within 1 year, with the proceeds ostensibly going toward care costs that would have been grossly inflated. Patricia broke down completely. I never agreed to having you institutionalized. Jessica told me it was just contingency planning in case your health declined. Eleanor turned to face her daughter directly. According to page 38, you were scheduled to receive $25,000 for your cooperation in the guardianship process. There's a signed agreement outlining your role in supporting Jessica's petition to have me declared mentally incompetent. The document Patricia had signed was there in black and white, a contract agreeing to provide testimony about Eleanor's supposed cognitive decline in exchange for a substantial payment. Patricia's signature was clearly visible at the bottom. I thought I was protecting you, Patricia sobbed. Jessica said you were starting to show signs of dementia, that we needed legal protections in place before you made financial mistakes that could hurt the whole family. Martin Kane's report included evidence that demolished this fiction. Medical records showed Eleanor's cognitive tests were all normal. Financial records proved she'd been managing money competently until Jessica took over. Bank surveillance footage showed Eleanor appearing alert and capable during every legitimate transaction. The most damning evidence was a recording Jessica didn't know existed. Eleanor's house had a security system with audio recording capabilities, and Martin Kane had obtained recordings of conversations where Jessica discussed her plans openly. I've been recording conversations in my own home for 6 months, Eleanor explained. The audio files are included in the investigator's report. Jessica, would you like me to play the recording from September 18th where you and Patricia discussed the timeline for having me declared incompetent? Jessica's face went white as Eleanor reached for a small digital recorder. That's not legal. You can't record people without their consent. Actually, in Ohio, I can record conversations in my own home without notifying guests, Eleanor replied. It's called the one-party consent rule, and I am that one party. The recording quality was crystal clear. Jessica's voice filled the dining room as she discussed strategies for convincing doctors that Eleanor was losing cognitive capacity. Patricia's voice could be heard agreeing to provide supporting testimony in exchange for payment. David and Sarah sat in stunned silence as they realized the full scope of the criminal conspiracy they'd unwittingly been part of. Their small business had received loans from Eleanor, money they'd assumed was voluntary family support. They now understood that Jessica had been using Eleanor's generosity as leverage to ensure their silence and compliance. "We never knew," Sarah whispered. "We thought Eleanor was just being generous with family members who needed help." Eleanor's investigation had uncovered financial manipulation that extended beyond direct theft. Jessica had been using Eleanor's money to provide loans and gifts to family members, creating a network of financial dependency that ensured no one would question her management of Eleanor's affairs. The report's final pages contained projections of what would have happened if Jessica's plan had succeeded. Eleanor's house would have been sold, her investments liquidated, her assets systematically transferred to cover Jessica's debts and finance her continued criminal activity. Eleanor herself would have ended up in a state-funded care facility, having been declared incompetent and stripped of her right to make financial decisions. The total theft, fraud, and projected financial damage amounts to over $400,000, Eleanor concluded. "This represents not just the money already stolen, but the complete destruction of my financial security and independence that was planned for the coming year." Jessica sat in devastated silence as the magnitude of her crimes was laid bare before the entire family. Her plan to humiliate me with evidence of supposed failure had instead revealed her own criminal behavior in exhaustive detail. But Eleanor wasn't finished with her revelations. The biggest shock was still to come. "There's one more thing everyone needs to understand," Eleanor said, reaching for yet another document. "Jessica, the private investigator you hired didn't find what you expected him to find about Cheryl. He found something completely different. The manila envelope Jessica had brought to destroy my reputation was about to reveal the truth that would complete her own destruction." Eleanor opened Martin Kane's report about my life with the same methodical precision she'd used to reveal Jessica's crimes. But instead of evidence of failure or deception, the pages contained documentation of success, achievement, and dedication that left the family speechless. According to the investigator Jessica hired, Cheryl is employed as a senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, a prestigious consulting firm in Cincinnati, Eleanor read. Her starting salary 3 years ago was $62,000. Her current salary is $94,000, with performance bonuses that brought her total compensation last year to over $110,000. Jessica's mouth opened and closed silently as the foundation of her accusations crumbled. Eleanor continued reading. She lives in a luxury apartment building downtown, drives a late-model BMW, and has savings and investment accounts totaling over $160,000. The investigator confirmed that all her financial success is legitimate, earned through hard work and professional excellence. Patricia stared at me in amazement. $62,000? You started at $62,000 3 years ago? The report notes that Cheryl's colleagues describe her as exceptionally dedicated and talented, Eleanor added. She's been promoted twice, leads major client accounts, and is being considered for partnership track at the firm. David's voice cracked with emotion. Partnership track? Cheryl, that's incredible. But Eleanor was just getting started. What's more interesting is what Cheryl has been doing with her evenings and weekends. Jessica, you might be particularly interested in this section. Eleanor flipped to a page marked with several yellow sticky notes. For the past 18 months, Cheryl has been attending law school classes specializing in elder fraud detection and financial crime investigation. She's earned certifications in forensic accounting and elder abuse advocacy. Jessica's face went from pale to green as the implications became clear. The investigator discovered that Cheryl has been building a comprehensive legal case against her own family members for systematic elder abuse and financial fraud, Eleanor continued. She's been working with the FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force for 8 months, providing evidence and expertise to support federal criminal charges. The silence in the room was deafening. Eleanor set down the report and looked directly at Jessica. The person you hired to find dirt on your sister instead discovered that your sister has been building a federal criminal case against you. Martin Kane realized he'd been hired by the subject of an ongoing FBI investigation to dig up dirt on the informant working with law enforcement. Patricia's voice was barely audible. The FBI is involved? That's when the doorbell rang. Eleanor smiled for the first time all evening. That would be Agent Rodriguez from the FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force. I invited her to join us for dessert. Agent Maria Rodriguez entered the dining room like she owned it, her badge and credentials immediately visible. She was a woman in her early 40s with graying hair and the kind of calm authority that comes from years of investigating complex financial crimes. "Good evening, everyone," Agent Rodriguez said, her voice professionally cordial. "I apologize for interrupting what I'm sure has been a memorable family gathering." Agent Rodriguez placed her own briefcase on the table next to the pile of evidence already spread across Eleanor's birthday dinner setting. "I've been working with Eleanor and Cheryl for several months now to document what we believe represents one of the most systematic cases of elder fraud we've encountered in this region." Jessica found her voice, though it came out as a squeak. "I want a lawyer." "That's certainly your right," Agent Rodriguez replied smoothly. "Though I should mention that we've been building this case with or without tonight's revelations. The evidence we've gathered independently is more than sufficient to support federal charges." Agent Rodriguez opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder. "Wire fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, mortgage fraud, insurance fraud, and conspiracy charges are being prepared against Jessica Matthews and Patricia Collins. The total damages exceed the federal threshold for major financial crimes." Patricia began sobbing uncontrollably. "I never meant for it to go this far. Jessica said we were just helping Eleanor manage her money better." "Mrs. Collins, you signed legal documents agreeing to provide false testimony about your mother's mental capacity in exchange for $25,000. Agent Rodriguez said matter-of-factly. "That's conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud, which is a federal felony." David and Sarah sat in stunned silence, realizing how close they'd come to being unwitting accomplices in a federal crime. Agent Rodriguez continued her methodical explanation. "The mortgage fraud alone carries a potential sentence of 30 years in federal prison. When combined with the elder abuse charges and the conspiracy elements, we're looking at very serious criminal penalties." Eleanor spoke up, her voice strong and clear. "Agent Rodriguez, I want everyone to understand that this investigation was initiated by me, supported by Cheryl's expertise, and conducted with complete cooperation from your task force. This is not a family dispute. This is a federal criminal case." Agent Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Eleanor has been exemplary in her cooperation with our investigation. Her decision to document the crimes while they were occurring has provided us with evidence that would normally take years to gather." The agent turned to address the room. "I want to be clear about something. Cheryl Matthews is not a suspect in this investigation. She's a highly valued consultant who has provided technical expertise and evidence analysis that significantly strengthened our case. Her work with our task force has been exemplary." Jessica's voice cracked as she spoke. "This is entrapment. You set me up." "Actually, Jessica, you set yourself up," I said, speaking for the first time since the revelations began. "I left 3 years ago because I knew what you were doing, but I didn't have enough evidence to prove it. You've spent 3 years committing more crimes, getting bolder, stealing larger amounts. You created the evidence that's going to convict you." Agent Rodriguez consulted her notes. The investigation also revealed that Jessica has been planning to expand her operation. We found communications with other individuals discussing similar schemes targeting elderly relatives. This wasn't just about stealing from Eleanor, it was about perfecting techniques for systematic elder abuse. Eleanor stood up from the table, her posture reflecting strength and dignity despite everything she'd endured. "I want everyone to understand something important. For 3 years, people in this family believed that Cheryl abandoned me. The truth is that Cheryl left to protect me. She spent 3 years building her career, gaining expertise, and preparing to seek justice for what was done to me." Eleanor walked over to where I sat and placed her hand on my shoulder. "Cheryl didn't abandon family. She saved family. Everything she's accomplished, her career success, her legal training, her work with law enforcement, all of it was focused on protecting me and seeking justice." Agent Rodriguez gathered her materials as she prepared to leave. "Formal charges will be filed within 72 hours. Jessica and Patricia will need to appear for arraignment next week. I strongly recommend that both of you consult with criminal defense attorneys immediately." As Agent Rodriguez headed toward the door, she turned back to address the room one final time. "I want to commend Eleanor for her courage in coming forward, and Cheryl for her dedication to seeking justice despite significant personal cost. Cases like this often go unreported because families are reluctant to pursue charges against their own members. Eleanor and Cheryl chose justice over family loyalty, and that choice will protect other elderly victims from similar crimes. After Agent Rodriguez left, the dining room fell into heavy silence. The birthday cake sat untouched on the counter, forgotten in the aftermath of revelations that had changed everything for everyone. Jessica sat staring at the table, the private investigator's report she'd planned to use against me, scattered among evidence of her own crimes. Her trap had become her downfall. Her weapon had become her indictment. Patricia continued sobbing, realizing that her cooperation with Jessica's schemes would likely result in federal prison time for a woman who'd never been in trouble with the law before. David and Sarah exchanged glances that mixed relief with guilt, relief that they hadn't been more deeply involved, guilt that they hadn't spoken up when they suspected something was wrong. Eleanor returned to her seat at the head of the table. Her birthday dinner transformed into the culmination of months of careful planning and investigation. Justice was finally being served, but the cost to the family would be enormous. "I want everyone to understand," Eleanor said softly, "that this evening wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about protection and truth. Jessica's crimes were escalating, and if we hadn't acted, she would have destroyed my financial security and independence completely." Eleanor looked around the table at her decimated family. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes protection means prosecution. Sometimes justice requires courage that feels like betrayal. The 80th birthday dinner that Jessica had planned as my humiliation had instead become the moment when 3 years of planning, investigation, and sacrifice finally delivered the justice Eleanor deserved. 6 months after that unforgettable birthday dinner, I stood in a federal courthouse watching Jessica and Patricia enter guilty pleas to multiple counts of elder fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced Jessica to 4 years in federal prison and ordered full restitution of the stolen funds. Patricia received 18 months and 3 years of supervised probation, her cooperation with the investigation earning her a reduced sentence. The mortgage on Eleanor's house was declared fraudulent and voided. The stolen money was recovered through asset forfeiture and insurance claims. Eleanor's financial security was not only restored but strengthened through better protections and oversight. My own life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined when I packed my car and drove away from Cleveland 3 years earlier. Morrison and Associates promoted me to Senior Manager of Financial Crimes Investigation, a position created specifically to utilize my unique combination of accounting expertise and legal training in elder fraud detection. Eleanor, rather than being weakened by the betrayal she'd endured, seemed energized by the experience of seeking and obtaining justice. Her mental sharpness and determination had impressed everyone involved in the investigation. She became a volunteer speaker for elder fraud prevention programs, sharing her story to help other elderly victims recognize warning signs of financial abuse. "I refuse to be defined by what was done to me," Eleanor told audiences at senior centers and community education programs. "I choose to be defined by what I did about it." Eleanor and I developed a relationship deeper and stronger than we'd ever had before. The shared experience of seeking justice had bonded us in ways that normal family relationships rarely achieve. We talked weekly, visited frequently, and worked together on fraud prevention initiatives that were helping protect other elderly victims. David and Sarah's relief at avoiding criminal charges motivated them to become advocates for family financial transparency. They'd learned hard lessons about the dangers of remaining silent when suspicious activities are occurring. Their restaurant business thrived once they were free from the stress of family secrets and financial manipulation. "We were so afraid of losing Eleanor's support that we ignored obvious warning signs," Sarah admitted during one of our family dinners. "Never again. Financial help isn't worth compromising integrity." My work with the FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force expanded beyond my own family's case. I became a regular consultant on complex financial crime investigations, helping law enforcement agencies understand sophisticated fraud schemes targeting elderly victims. My accounting background and legal training made me uniquely qualified to analyze financial evidence and explain complex fraud patterns to juries. The success of Eleanor's case led to invitations to speak at conferences about elder abuse prevention, family financial protection, and the importance of reporting suspected crimes against elderly relatives. My story resonated with audiences because it demonstrated that protecting elderly family members sometimes requires difficult choices that look like betrayal, but are actually acts of profound love. Martin Kane, the private investigator whose ethical decision changed everything, became a valued colleague and friend. His choice to investigate the truth rather than manufacture evidence his client wanted resulted in his testifying as a key witness in federal court. His reputation for integrity grew, and his business expanded as law enforcement agencies began hiring him for complex financial investigations. Jessica taught me something important about my profession, Martin told me over coffee one afternoon. Sometimes the most important investigation is the one you're not being paid to conduct. My career continued to flourish as my expertise in financial crimes became nationally recognized. I was promoted to partner track at Morrison & Associates, leading a specialized team that helps corporations and law enforcement agencies detect and prevent elder fraud. My work protecting vulnerable populations provided professional satisfaction that made every sacrifice worthwhile. The most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force presented me with a civilian commendation for my contributions to their investigations. Standing in the FBI field office, surrounded by law enforcement professionals who had become colleagues and friends, I thought about the terrified young woman who'd driven away from her family home 3 years earlier. That woman had believed she was losing everything by leaving her family. She'd discovered instead that sometimes losing everything is the first step toward gaining something far more valuable: the courage to stand for truth regardless of personal cost. Eleanor's house became a gathering place for our reconstructed family. Without the toxicity of Jessica's manipulation and Patricia's enabling, David and Sarah's children could develop genuine relationships with their great-grandmother. The family dinners we shared were built on honesty, transparency, and mutual respect, rather than secrets and financial dependency. "This is what family is supposed to feel like," Eleanor said during one of our Sunday dinners. "Safe, supportive, truthful. I'm 80 years old, and I'm just learning what healthy family relationships look like." Patricia's sentence included mandatory counseling for financial addiction and family therapy to address the enabling behaviors that had allowed Jessica's crimes to escalate. Her transformation was gradual but genuine. The woman who'd been terrified of financial insecurity learned to find security in honesty rather than in enabling criminal behavior. "I spent so many years being afraid that I'd end up poor and alone," Patricia told me during one of our carefully supervised visits. "I was so afraid of that future that I helped create the very situation I was trying to avoid." Patricia's rehabilitation included working at a nonprofit organization that helps families recover from financial crimes. Her first-hand experience with the devastating effects of family financial abuse made her an effective advocate for other victims. Jessica's time in prison provided her with opportunities for education and reflection that she'd never had while focused on criminal schemes. She earned her GED, completed courses in business ethics, and participated in therapy programs addressing gambling addiction and financial compulsions. The letters Jessica wrote to Eleanor from prison evolved over time from angry justifications to genuine remorse to thoughtful reflections on the choices that had destroyed her relationship with her family. Eleanor chose to maintain limited contact, believing that forgiveness was possible, but trust would require years to rebuild. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," Eleanor explained. "It means choosing not to let someone else's choices define your emotional life. I can forgive Jessica for what she did while still protecting myself from what she might do again." My own romantic life flourished once I was free from family secrets and criminal investigations. I met Thomas, a fellow attorney who specializes in victim advocacy, at a conference on financial crimes. Our relationship developed naturally, from professional respect to personal connection, built on shared values of justice, integrity, and protection of vulnerable populations. "I've never met anyone who chose justice over family loyalty," Thomas told me early in our relationship. "That kind of moral courage is incredibly attractive." Thomas proposed on the anniversary of Eleanor's birthday dinner, in the same dining room where the truth had finally been revealed. Eleanor cried happy tears as she watched me accept a proposal from a man who understood and valued the choices I'd made to protect her. The wedding was held in Eleanor's backyard, surrounded by the reconstructed family that had emerged from the ashes of betrayal and criminal prosecution. David officiated the ceremony, having become ordained online specifically for the occasion. Sarah handled the catering through their restaurant. Eleanor gave me away, proud to represent the family connections that mattered most. Today we celebrate not just a marriage, but the triumph of truth over deception, justice over convenience, and love over manipulation, Eleanor said in her toast at the reception. Cheryl taught our family that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that refusal looks like abandonment. My work with elder fraud prevention expanded internationally as my expertise became recognized globally. I testified before congressional committees about the need for stronger protections for elderly victims. My research contributed to new legislation that improved prosecution of family financial abuse and enhanced penalties for crimes targeting vulnerable populations. The academic recognition that followed included invitations to lecture at law schools and business schools about the intersection of family relationships and financial crimes. My case study was included in textbooks on elder law and financial crime investigation, helping train new generations of professionals to recognize and combat family financial abuse. Looking back on the journey from that terrifying family confrontation 3 years earlier to the professional and personal fulfillment I'd achieved, I understood that the hardest choice had also been the right choice. Walking away from family dysfunction hadn't meant abandoning family love, it had meant refusing to enable family destruction. Eleanor's wisdom guided my understanding of the lessons we'd all learned. Family loyalty isn't about protecting family members from consequences of their choices, she told audiences at fraud prevention seminars. It's about loving family members enough to hold them accountable for their choices. The ripple effects of our case extended far beyond our own family. Other elderly victims found courage to report financial abuse because they'd heard Eleanor's story. Other adult children found strength to confront family financial crimes because they'd learned about my experience. Other law enforcement agencies improved their elder fraud investigations because they'd studied our case. The most profound lesson I learned was that justice isn't always dramatic or immediate, but it's always worth pursuing. The 3 years I spent building expertise, gathering evidence, and working with law enforcement felt like abandonment at the time. Looking back, I understood that those years were actually an investment in protection, truth, and ultimately healing for everyone involved. Eleanor lived to see Jessica's release from prison and Patricia's completion of probation. She maintained appropriate boundaries while offering opportunities for relationship reconstruction based on demonstrated change rather than promises of change. Her example taught all of us that forgiveness is possible without naivety, that love can coexist with accountability. The family gatherings we shared in Eleanor's final years were characterized by honesty, transparency, and genuine affection. Jessica's participation was limited and supervised, but her presence reminded everyone that redemption is possible when people accept responsibility for their choices and commit to different behavior. When Eleanor passed away peacefully at 86, her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by her courage, her advocacy, and her example. Federal agents, elder fraud victims, family members, and community advocates gathered to honor a woman who'd refused to be defined by what was done to her. Eleanor's will reflected the values she'd embraced after surviving financial abuse. Her assets were protected by robust legal structures that prevented any single person from gaining excessive control. Her charitable bequests supported elder fraud prevention programs and victim advocacy organizations. My inheritance included not just financial assets but something far more valuable: the knowledge that standing up for truth, even when it's difficult and painful, creates lasting positive change that extends far beyond personal benefit. Today, I continue my work protecting elderly victims of financial crimes, training law enforcement professionals, and advocating for stronger legal protections. Eleanor's story has become part of the training materials used by FBI agents investigating elder fraud cases. The question I'm asked most frequently during speaking engagements is whether I ever regret the choices I made that led to my family members' prosecution. The answer is always the same. I regret that those choices were necessary, but I don't regret making them. Sometimes love requires courage that looks like betrayal. Sometimes protection requires actions that feel like abandonment. Sometimes justice demands sacrifices that seem impossibly difficult. The 3-year journey from family outcast to elder fraud expert taught me that the most important victories are often the ones that nobody sees coming, built through quiet persistence rather than dramatic confrontation. Eleanor's 80th birthday dinner that ended with federal arrests wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of our real family story, built on truth instead of secrets, justice instead of enablement, and love that was strong enough to demand accountability. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you ever faced a situation where protecting someone meant taking actions they might never forgive? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like this video if Eleanor's courage inspired you. Subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that standing up for truth is always worth it, even when it's the hardest thing you've ever done. Thank you for listening to this story about justice, redemption, and the kind of love that's strong enough to hold people accountable for their choices. Remember that protecting vulnerable people sometimes requires difficult decisions, but those decisions can create positive change that lasts for generations. Until next time, keep choosing truth over convenience, justice over comfort, and love that's strong enough to demand better from the people we care about most.